Hello and welcome to another TLDR global video. China is an interesting country, one of the world's biggest economies, but also significantly controlled by the government. So in this landscape of socialist market economies, one figure stands out: Jack Ma. Ma's probably most famous for being the co-founder and former executive chairman of Alibaba, a company often lazily described as China's Amazon. However, Alibaba's influence is far greater than that, dominating the e-commerce and technology ecosystem in China and around the world. Being the company's founder and chairman granted Ma global notoriety, with the businessman finding himself at the top of Forbes' most powerful people list in 2019. However, today we're not discussing Ma because of his wealth or power, at least not directly. We're discussing him because he's seemingly completely disappeared. This is a brand new channel. Well, this is our third video. So if you're not yet subscribed, then be sure to hit the button and ring the bell to be notified when we post next. Also, we're running a poll at the moment to find out what the world's best flag is. If you haven't voted already, then there's a link in the description, and we'll be sharing the full results and breakdown on this channel very soon. So vote and then subscribe to make sure that you don't miss a thing. Let's cut to the chase. The last time that Jack Ma was seen in public was on October 24th, when he gave a speech at the Bund Finance Summit in Shanghai. This is actually a really good place to start the story, because in that speech, Ma had a go at China's state-run banks for being too risk-averse. He told the crowd that the banks had a quote pawn shop mentality, in that they would only lend to people who could provide collateral. Since then, no one has seen or heard from Ma. Recent reports suggest that Ma is fine, but there's obviously been speculation that the Chinese Communist Party, annoyed by some of his recent behaviour, including that speech, are involved. To be fair here, the CCP does have some form in this respect. To give just a few examples, in 2015, Guo Guangcheng, an investor, disappeared for 7 days, reappearing later to say that he was assisting in certain investigations conducted by Chinese authorities. In a more serious case, Ren Chuchang, a Chinese property tycoon, disappeared in March after writing an essay blaming the Chinese government for the coronavirus outbreak, and calling Xi Jinping a clown stripped naked who still wants to be emperor. In September, Chuchang appeared in court, where he was sentenced to 18 years in prison for corruption, bribery and embezzlement of public funds, after apparently voluntarily confessing. Another, Zhao Zhenhua, a billionaire Chinese asset manager, went missing in 2017 and hasn't been seen since. So, in the light of these cases, why has Ma gone AWOL? Well, it's almost definitely related to the CCP's decision to block Ant Group's $37 billion initial public offering on the Hong Kong and Shanghai stock exchanges, which would have been the world's largest IPO ever. Ant Group was co-founded by Ma and is essentially the finance wing of his business. While Ma only owns 8.8% of Ant Group's shares, the Alibaba Group, the other side of his business, owns a 33% share in Ant, and he still has majority voting rights. Basically, Ma is co-founder and de facto boss at Ant. According to state media, the government decided to halt the IPO in order to protect investors. Then, on Christmas Eve 2020, China's State Administration for Market Regulation announced that it was investigating Ma's Alibaba Group for monopoly conduct. China's anti-monopoly laws allow for a maximum fine of 10% of a company's sales from the previous year, which in Alibaba's case would be billions of dollars. The point here is that Ma's disappearance isn't a complete mystery. It's most likely related to the CCP's recent crackdown on his businesses. So why is the CCP cracking down? Well, there probably are genuine concerns about monopolistic practices. SAMR was specifically investigating exclusive dealing agreements, which is when platforms require all merchants to sell exclusively on their site, which obviously limits competition. This is quite a common practice among Alibaba and other e-commerce giants in China. In fact, another Chinese e-commerce giant, JD.com, took Alibaba to court for this exact thing in 2015. And in return, Alibaba took JD.com to court for the same thing a few years later. And to be fair, Chinese e-commerce sector looks worryingly concentrated. The top 3 firms account for more than 90% of all sales in the country. For comparison, in America, the top 3 firms only account for about 50% of total sales. To top it all off, China does more online shopping than most nations. By the end of 2021, China is expected to do more than 25% of its shopping online, which is about twice as much as the US. The point is that e-commerce is big in China, and the sector does look worryingly monopolistic, so there might be some genuine cause for regulation. The CCP might also be worried about Ma's Ant Group because of Alipay. Ant's Alipay app is ubiquitous in China, used by more than 700 million people and 80 million merchants every month, processing payments worth $18.2 trillion in the past year. Recently, Alipay has got into some trouble for its lending practices. Ant offers loans to its users and has become a big part of its business, making up for about 40% of its revenue. With over 500 million users taking out loans using Alipay last year, Ant now lends more money than any other Chinese bank. Now, the reason that the CCP might be getting worried is because they're generally concerned about debt. This is what Ma was getting at with his pawn shop speech. He was complaining that state-affiliated banks were too wary about lending money. But China has seen an explosion of household debt recently, which will worry the CCP, and part of that has to do with Alipay's lending. Alipay has clashed with Chinese state banks before though. In 2013, Ant Group basically started a fund called the Yuebao Fund, which translates as account balance treasure. It was basically a fund that Alipay users could easily invest in, and lots of them did. In fact, by 2017, it was the biggest money market fund in the world. As a result, China's state banks got worried about liquidity because no one was investing in them anymore. So the CCP stepped in and forced Alipay to put limits on how much people could deposit. As a result, between March and December of 2018, its funds under management fell by a third. The long and short of it is that the CCP is probably a bit worried about the size and influence of Ma and his businesses. For a long time, they've left the Chinese e-commerce sector basically unregulated and encouraged private businesses to do their thing. This has obviously made China wealthier, and its e-commerce sector is one of the largest in the world. But in turn, companies like Alipay have got so big that they've begun to threaten the stability of the financial sector, and therefore the state too. As a final note, this happened just as the tide of public opinion was turning against Ma. Cracking down on Ma's businesses and forcing him into hiding would have been politically harder for the CCP to do a couple of years ago, when Ma was super popular. However, Ma's become significantly less popular in China recently. Quite a lot of it is to do with Huobi, the lending platform on Alipay. Basically, Alipay pushes users into using Huobi, and lots of them have accidentally ended up using credit and getting into debt when they still had funds in their account. Ma has also endorsed the 996, referring to the 9 AM to 9 PM 6-day work week expected in China's intense work culture. All of this comes in the context of a change of heart towards billionaires in China more generally, with growing wealth inequality and poor social mobility. So that's probably why Ma has gone AWOL. The CCP is cracking down on businesses because they've got too big and they're perceived to be too political. And he's either decided to get out of the way or been pushed out of the way. This isn't to defend China's likely heavy-handed action though. Making private business owners go into hiding clearly isn't a democratic or liberal way of doing things. And even in other countries where attitudes towards monopolizers and billionaires are changing, this kind of action wouldn't even be considered, and quite rightly so. What do you think of this process though? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that's in the description.